Hey, what's up everyone? In this new tutorial, we are going to make a simple 2D zombie AI in Unity. We're going to create this character and we're going to use the state machine behavior to implement the AI of our enemy. As you can see, for now he's idle because we are far away from him, and if I go close a bit he will start chasing, and if we are too close he starts attacking. So it's very easy to implement this kind of AI using the animator component. You only need to know a bit about the animations and how to transition between different states. And if he reaches the edges, you see he stops and goes back to the idle state. But if we go to the other side, he will start chasing again. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. But before that, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the bell icon. I appreciate that. Also, don't forget to watch the previous videos. We are making a 2D platformer game. So here we have our 2D platformer game, which we have created in our previous videos. So first of all, we need to download the sprites of our enemy. And I'm using the Game Art 2D website. The link is under the video description. Then you need to select the freebies section. Under here we have some free sprites. In this video we're gonna use the enemy or this zombie character. We have all of the animations that we need, like idle, walk, attack, and so on. So let's download it using this free download button. Then we need to extract the files using extract here, and we will have this PNG folder where we have our enemies. We have a male version and a female one. Let's import our files, but first I'm gonna rename the folder to zombie, and let's import it into Unity. I'm gonna drag it under the assets folder, and once it gets imported, we're gonna start by creating the idle animation. So by default the enemy is in an idle state. Here you could use the female version or the male one. So let's select the female, select the first idle sprite and shift select the last one. Then let's drag these under the hierarchy, and Unity creates the animation by default. Let's put it under the animation folder and let's create a new one. I'm gonna call it zombie. Then let's give it a name like idle. Then let's hit save, and that's going to add the enemy in our scene. Let's give it a name like zombie, and we want to change the size a bit. So I'm gonna change the scale to 0.45 on the X and on the Y. Then let's move it to the left side by changing the X position to -11. Also, let's change the order a layer to a bigger number like 5. Now if we hit play, you see that we have our enemy and he's idle, but we didn't add the logic yet to transition between the different states. And to do that, we are going to use the animator component. So when we've created this zombie character, we have this animator controller that is created by default. Let's give it a name like controller. If you double click on it, you will see this animator window where we have all of these states like the idle one. We can change the name to idle state. And before we start writing the code, let's create the other animations. The same thing, you need to drag in these sprites. And in this video we're gonna need the run animation, and it's gonna be the chase state. Let's drag it and let's create the animation under the same folder. I'm gonna call it walk. Then let's hit save, and it's going to add this character as well. We need to get rid of it. We only need the animation, which is walk, and delete this animator controller. Then let's drag the attack sprites. Then let's open the animator controller again, and we need to drag in the other states. you only need to drag the animation, and let's change the name to chase state. And finally, let's drag in the attack animation, and let's call it attack state. Now to switch between these states, we are going to add transitions. For example, the enemy can go from the idle state to the chase state when the player is close. We can make a transition by right-click, make transition from idle state to chase state. And the same thing, we need to go back whenever the player is too far, using make transition to the idle state. Now to control these transitions, we add parameters. Under this parameters tab, let's create a new parameter using the plus icon. I'm going to use a boolean, and let's call it is chasing. Then we can select the transition, and we want to go from the idle state to the chase state. Whenever this boolean is true, we can hit this plus icon and add the condition is chasing true. And we can switch back to the idle state whenever we set the boolean is chasing to false. And basically we're going to change this parameter from our scripts. But before that, we need to make some changes. For example, let's change the exit time to 1. Also, it's recommended to change the transition duration to 0 if you are working on a 2D game. Then we're going to uncheck has exit time. And if you leave has exit time checked, our enemy will transition from the chase state to the idle state only when the chase state is finished. But we need to transition immediately whenever the player is close to the enemy or he's far away from him. The same thing for the other transition. Let's change the exit time to 1 and the transition duration to 0 and uncheck the has exit time option. But if I hit play, the enemy is going to be idle all the time because we didn't add the logic to switch between idle and chase. And to do that, we can add a script to each of these states to check if something is happening. And to do that, we can select the idle state. Then we have this button, add behavior. If you click on it, Unity creates a script. We can give it a name. I'm going to call it idle state as well. Then hit enter and create and add. Also, we can open it up. It is created under the assets. If you double click on it, we can open it up in Visual Studio. And once you open the script, you will see a bunch of comments, but don't worry, we have some methods. We are going to use these 3. So let's uncomment these. So here we have 3 functions: the onState enter, onState update, and the onState exit. Basically, the onState enter is called once when we enter the state. That means the idle state. Then we have the onState update. It's called over and over again when the state is active. That means when the player is idle. All what you write under here is going to be called over and over again. It's like the update method. And finally, we have the onState exit that is called once we exit the idle state. For example, we can use the onState enter to play some kind of a sound when we enter the idle state. Also, we use the onState enter to initialize some variables and so on. So this script only works when the enemy is in the idle state, and that's very important. So whenever our enemy is idle, we're gonna check for the distance between the zombie and the player. Then if it's less than a certain range, we can switch to the chase state. And to do that, we can add a player variable using transform. Then let's call it target. Then to get the player, we can use find object with tag. And to do that, let's write it under the onState enter using target equals game object dot find object with tag, and we want to get the player, so let's pass in the player tag dot transform. After that, we can go under the onState update So each time we are going to calculate the distance using a float, and let's call it distance equals vector2 dot distance, and this is a built-in function that allows us to calculate the distance between two vectors. So let's pass in the player position using target dot position and the zombie position, and to access the zombie transform we can use the animator variable. So this is the animator of the enemy. We can use animator dot transform dot position, and once we calculate the distance we are going to check if it's less than 10 or less than 7 using if distance is less than 7 units. We're gonna switch to the chase state by changing the boolean is chasing using animator dot set boolean. Then we need to pass in the right name, which is chasing, then true. So let's save the script and let's hit play. So by default the zombie character is idle, and if we go close a bit it starts walking. So our script is working, and we only need to add a chase state script so that we can move the zombie towards the player when he's in the chase state. And to do that we are going to select the chase state and add behavior. Let's call it chase state, then new script and create and add. Then let's open the script. So this script is gonna work whenever the zombie is in the chase state. We need to move it towards the player, and to do that we need to add a target variable using transform target. You could also call it player. Then let's initialize it. So I will just copy this line of code. Then we can move the enemy towards the player using vector2 dot move towards. We give it the current enemy position, which we can access using animator dot transform dot position, and the target position using target dot position. Also we have another parameter which is the speed, so we can add another variable using public so that we can adjust it, float, and let's call it speed. I'm gonna give it a default value 3. Then we can enter it as a third parameter, and let's multiply it by the time to delta time to make it frame rate independent. But our vector2.move towards function returns a vector2, and it's the new position of the zombie. So we need to actually change the position using animator dot transform dot position equals this vector, and that will actually move the zombie. Let's save the script. You could also change the speed variable by selecting the chase state and adjust it from here. And there you go, now the enemy is chasing. But we have few problems. We need to flip the enemy. Also we need to fix the Y position. As you can see, he's flying. So first things first, let's go back to the script. And here, instead of using the target position, we will only use the X value. So let's cut this parameter and create a vector2. I'm gonna call it a new position or new pose equals new vector2. For the X, I'm gonna use the target X position using transform.position.x. But for the Y value, we're gonna leave it the same using animator.transform.position.y, and that's gonna fix the problem. And let's pass in the new position using a new pose. Then let's save the script, and I'm gonna create another script and attach it to the zombie so that we can flip it when the player is on the left side. And to do that, let's go under the scripts folder, and under the enemy folder I'm gonna right click, create C# script. I'm gonna call it zombie. Then let's attach it to the zombie character, and let's open it up in Visual Studio. So under this script we're gonna check if the player is on the right side. In such case, we're gonna change the zombie scale to a positive value 0.45, But if the player is on the left side, we can flip the enemy by changing the X scale to minus 0.45, and that's how we can flip it. So let's go back to the script. First, we need to add our player transform using transform. Let's call it target as well. Then we can find it using target equals game object dot find object with tag, and we need the player tag, so make sure that the player has the player tag as well, dot transform. Then under the update function, we're gonna check if target dot position dot x, so if the x position of the player is greater than the enemy x position, using transform dot position dot x, that means that the player is on the right side. In this case, we are going to change the scale of the enemy using transform dot local scale equals new. You could use a vector 3, but we are working on a 2D game. We can use the vector 2. In this case, we are going to pass in a positive value 0.45 to flip the enemy to the right side. And don't forget this F because we have floats, but otherwise we're gonna flip it to the left side by changing the X scale to minus 0.45. Let's save the script and test it. And now our enemy is not moving on the y-axis, he's only moving on the x. Also, it is flipped when we are on the left side or on the right side. But whenever we go to the other side, you see that he's moving. Basically, we're going to create an empty game object and use physics.raycast to check if there is something under the feet of the enemy. If it doesn't, we are going to stop him. And to do that, let's go back to the enemy and we're going to create an empty game object on the right side of the enemy using right click, create empty, and let's call it border check. Then let's move it using the move tool on this side. Then let's open up the chase state script. Whenever the enemy is chasing, we're going to use physics2d.raycast. But first of all, let's add a reference to the empty game object that we have created using transform border check. You could add a tag to this border check empty game object and use find object with tag. But we have another option. We can add this border check reference under the zombie script using public transform, and let's call it border check as well. Now we can reference it from the inspector because the zombie script is attached to the zombie character. But I forgot to save the script. Now let's drag in the border check, and once you do that, we can access this variable from the chase state using the animator component. So let's go under the onState enter and initialize the border check using animator dot get component, and we can find the zombie component or the zombie script, and because we have declared the variable as public, we can use dot border check, and that's how we can initialize our variables from the chase state script. And once you do that, we can go under the onState update and let's use if physics2d dot raycast. So this takes a position and we're gonna use the border check position using border check dot position, and the second parameter is a direction and we're gonna use vector2 dot down, and that's because we want to look down and check if there is an object. Also we have a third parameter which is the maximum distance. We can pass in 2. Let me zoom in a bit. So this physics.raycast is going to create an invisible line, and if it's hitting an object that has a collider like the ground, it returns true, otherwise it returns false. So we want to check if this equals false. In such case, we're gonna stop our enemy by switching to the idle state using animator dot set boolean, and it's the boolean is chasing. Let's set it to false to switch back to the idle state. But we will have one problem. Whenever the enemy switches to the idle state, he's going to check if the distance is less than 7. Then he will switch back to the chase state. And to fix that, we can add the same if statement. So if there is nothing under the feet of the enemy, when he's in the idle state, we need to return. So whenever the enemy is idle, we can check if there is nothing under the border check empty game object. We need to return. We don't need to check if the distance is less than 7. So let's use return. And that will fix the problem. Also, we need to add a reference to the border check. I will just copy these lines of code. Then let's initialize it. Under the onState enter. Let's save our script. Then let's go back. So we have our zombie idle by default. If we go close to him, he starts chasing. But if we go to the other side, as you can see, it stops. And that's because we haven't something under the border check empty game object. But if I go to the other side, the enemy goes back to the chase state. So it's working. Now we're gonna add the attack state. When the enemy is too close, we're going to switch to an attack state. And that's very easy now. Let's go back to the animator window. And we need to make a transition to the attack state. So let's go from chase to attack. And also we need to go back if we are far away from the enemy. Then to control these transitions, we need to add another parameter. And let's use a boolean. I'm gonna call it is attacking. And we're gonna switch from chase to attack when is attacking is true. Also make sure to change the exit time to 1, the transition duration to 0, and uncheck has exit time. The same thing for the other one. And let's change the condition. So we need to switch back to the chase state when is attacking is false. And we're gonna change this parameter from the chase state script. So let's open it up. Then under here, we're gonna calculate the distance. And if it's less than 2 units or 1.5, we're gonna switch to the chase state. And to do that, I will just copy these lines of code. So here we are calculating the distance. And let's paste it under the onState update. Each time we need to calculate the distance between the target and the enemy. And if it's less than 1.5, in such case we are going to change the boolean is attacking, and that will switch the enemy from the chase state to the attack state. But also we need to go back, so we're gonna add another script using add behavior attack state. So under this script, we're gonna check if the distance is greater than 2 units. We're gonna switch back to the chase state and so on. And because I'm a lazy person, I will just copy the lines of code to get the target under the attack state. Then under the onState update, we're gonna calculate the distance and check if it's greater than 2. So let's change the condition, distance greater than 2. Then we need to switch back to the chase state by changing the boolean is attacking to false. Let's save it. And there you go, we have created a simple enemy AI using the state machine behavior. As you can see, he's attacking. Also, if we go to the other side, he goes back to the idle state. You could also play some kind of sound effects. For example, once we exit from the idle state, we can play some kind of scream sound. And to do that, we can use the audio manager. And if you didn't watch my video about the audio manager, make sure to check it out. So here we have some sounds. We can add more using this plus icon. And let's open one of these scripts, like the idle state. So once we exit from the idle state, we can play this sound using audio manager dot instance dot play, and let's pass in the name zombie scream. Let's save the script. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any question or comment, make sure to write it under the comment section down below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the bell icon. I appreciate that. And I will see you in the next one.